Hi everyone, Caoimhin here from MTU's Blackrock Castle Observatory. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the night sky for this weekend, and we'll be zooming in on the planet Uranus as well as a galaxy in the constellation of Leo. Those will be the two objects that we'll be paying particular attention to in this video. So if you're interested in those kinds of topics, then make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the blue bell icon next to the subscribe button to make sure you get notified as we post new videos. We'll be posting these regularly as we move forward. So the sun has just set here as we come past almost 6, just a little after 20 past 6, almost 20 past 6 in the evening. So the sun is definitely after going down, but we definitely have that orange yellow glow. Only the brightest objects are starting to emerge. We'll have to push a little bit later for fainter objects to become apparent in the sky, but even a little after 7 o'clock, most of the orange yellow glow has disappeared. We're seeing a lot of the fainter stars, and here in Cork City, this is about as much as we'll see with our level of light pollution anyway. So this means Uranus, of course, isn't going to be visible. It's not visible to the naked eye. But we know that Mars, Uranus, and all of the planets follow the same path across the sky, a path we call the ecliptic. So it goes through a particular group of constellations. Just over here, we've got Aldebaran in Taurus. A little bit further over, we've got the twins Gemini. Lower down again, we have the lion Leo. So these constellations, Cancer the Crab is in there as well. These are the constellations that the ecliptic passes along, so these are the constellations that the planets pass along. So we know that Uranus and Mars, they're both planets, they're going to be somewhere along the same line in the sky, but luckily they are very close together at the moment. Uranus is just tucked in next to Mars. You may have seen our shorter Twitter video a couple of weeks ago talking about Uranus. A couple of weeks ago, the moon was also here, and it formed a nice triangle with Uranus and Mars. But unfortunately, the moon does produce its own light, which can make things a bit more difficult to see. Now, in previous videos, we have also shown that Uranus, even with quite powerful telescopes, generally looks like a pale blue dot. And getting the color usually takes a reasonably powerful telescope. It is sort of a turquoisey, tealy kind of color, but you only see that when you really get a close look. Otherwise, it can look very, very similar to a star. Once we zoom in with something very powerful, we'll start to see moons, but these moons are incredibly difficult to observe with a normal telescope. You usually, it will require special cameras that can do long exposure times to pick up on these faint, very distant moons around this very distant planet. As we start to take a closer look, we start to see the rings here. Uranus, of course, orbits around the sun almost tilted on its side. So for half of the year, the north pole of the planet faces the sun, and as it moves around, that swaps over to the south pole, and it faces the sun for the other portion of the year. So we're seeing the rings here pretty much full on. We're seeing the rings almost from above or in front. At other times of Uranus's orbit, those rings would be edge on with the Earth, which makes them far more difficult to see. You might notice that these names here come from Shakespeare. Puck from A Midsummer's Night Dream. We have Ophelia, Umbriel, another one from Midsummer's Night Dream. There's a Portia up here around Uranus from The Merchant of Venice. Once these more distant planets were discovered, it was hard to give them all names that came from Greek mythology. And of course, we are starting to use names from other mythologies like Celtic and Norse now as we discover new moons around planets such as Saturn. With Uranus, the decision was made to go with pieces of literature. So mainly Shakespeare. There is a couple of characters from a poem by Alexander Pope going around Uranus as well. So that's how we were able to look at it, using whatever kind of magnification we wanted. We can zoom all the way in with this software, Stellarium. But to give a more realistic view of what you might see, for example, through binoculars or through a telescope, we can use the ocular setting in Stellarium. So by going through various sizes of binoculars, you'll see that it never looks much more impressive than a dot in the sky. Even with quite large binoculars, a dot in the sky is pretty much all you'll get. Now, this would be quite a large telescope. This is a Celestron C11. So these are quite big telescopes, and we're just about seeing Uranus's moons here. But again, they'd be easier to see in photographs. The amount of light coming into your telescope can really affect what detail you see on those moons. So this is a reasonably normal ocular. It doesn't have any special measurements built into it. It just lets you see the moon, the moons and the planet. But we are still using a very large telescope. With something a bit more realistic in size, something more people may have, looking by a 6 by 1000 telescope. This is still pretty large, 60 by 700. This is a little bit more realistic, or a 6 by 70 centimeter telescope. This is what you'll see, and they're still reasonable telescopes. If that's the size of telescope you have, you might get the pale bluish teal color. We need to use very large telescopes, and we'll move up here to a gigantic telescope, Meade LX200, and we're still just about seeing those moons. And this is a very, very large telescope, the kind of telescope that's used to image black holes in other galaxies, but with something like a planet so much smaller than a galaxy, even a giant telescope like this can struggle to see much detail on it. But there are, of course, galaxies for us to look at as well. Now, we will wait for things to get a tiny bit darker, just a little bit past 7, coming up to 8 o'clock in the evening. Now, we already mentioned the constellations Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and Leo. They're part of that path of the ecliptic where we see the planets. Leo is just starting to come into a reasonable position early in the evening. We're not at 8 o'clock yet, but Leo, especially the head of Leo, is already up above the eastern horizon. The lower an object is in the sky, the more of our atmosphere you need to look through to see it. So as these objects get higher, you get to see them with a bit more detail. So we're going to take a closer look at the shape of Leo here. The front portion of Leo, this curved shape in the sky, is known as the sickle. And we want to look right at the top of the sickle, right up here. We're looking for a galaxy, and there are a lot of galaxies in the sky. The Andromeda Galaxy and the Milky Way would probably be the two most famous. The Andromeda Galaxy, one of very, very few galaxies that you can see with your naked eye. Now here, we're already after zooming in quite a lot. This would be a reasonably powerful telescope, and we're starting to see a faint shape here, just on the same line as Al-Janubi, which is the head star in the sickle of Leo. So we'll move over just a little bit, and we'll keep zooming in. The Andromeda Galaxy, we see it at quite an angle, which means it's difficult to see the real round shape, whereas this galaxy here, we're seeing it at a slightly different angle again. And of course, different galaxies in the sky present themselves differently to the Earth. So this is NGC 2903. It doesn't have a very famous, catchy name, but this is because this galaxy was discovered just a little bit later. It's a little bit fainter, and it was more difficult to see. And we are looking at it here in the city with all the light pollution we have. As long as you have a powerful enough telescope, so with a Meade LX200, it would be no problem at all. But with something closer to a pair of binoculars, and we'll go back to binoculars here, going to look very faint, especially if you're observing from here in the city. So yeah, this would be quite a good binoculars at 15 by 70, quite good for binoculars, and it will be visible as a faint glow in the sky from here in the city. If we can get out into the countryside, well then even a pair of binoculars can give you a much clearer view, because this light isn't going to be interfered with the light coming from the city. So there are galaxies out there that you can see with binoculars. This is one that isn't visible with the naked eye, but a good pair of binoculars can still give you quite a good view. Of course, a powerful telescope will give you an even better view seeing these clouds of gas. And again, even with a powerful telescope, your view will be improved by being in the countryside. So this is our view with Meade LX200, very big telescope in the countryside. And even for a big telescope like this, depending on what we're looking at and the kind of filters that we're employing, the light from the city can still have an effect and make things look just a little bit fainter. So it always helps to take a closer look with a telescope or binoculars, and even a binoculars can make a surprising amount of difference. And these are just two of the more distant objects that we can't see with our naked eye, but even in the city, a good telescope, good binoculars can give us a look at the distant planet Uranus and at distant galaxies like NGC 2903. So I hope you get a chance to take out your telescopes, take out your binoculars, or just try and figure out where they are with your naked eye. Even if you can find the head of Leo just next to Mars there, knowing where those objects are can still feel pretty nice when you're finding them in the real sky. So I hope you all get a chance to do that over the coming days.